Okay, so our last lightning talk of the evening is my coworker, Andrew Ripka. So I'm excited about Andrew giving us a talk about this, and I think it's possible that I've seen him give talks about everything else and not the actual stuff that we work on. Because I saw you give you gave a talk at Open Source North, and it was sort of about this, but it was also other stuff. So.
I'm sorry to report I'm actually not going to talk about what we do.
What? I'm really excited then.
Is my mic on?
Can people hear Andrew in the back?
I apologize. So 3 years ago, I started getting sick at this time of year. This year, we identified that it's this. So,
I see that you have a picture of the culprit.
yes, this is ragweed. I've mistimed the application of my allergy medicine so that it's going to wear off. We'll live through it. And I, of course, I'm using preview for my presentation, so we'll see what happens. So
if you move the mouse, then so it's not on that, then that eventually, sorry, it's the pointer. So then that eventually goes away.
I have
done this. I went through an entire conference talk where it was like Monitorama 2014. It took me about 45 minutes into my talk before I realized that I needed to move the pointer to make that thing go away. I eventually did when it was covering something important.
I also have a 2016 MacBook Pro, which will go down in history as the MacBook Pro where they kind of ruined it. I've got a gigantic touchpad that I can find every time I'm typing, except for when I want to draw a mouse somewhere. So Bridget slacked me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, maybe you'd like to do something platformy. And I have this recurring theme that I stole from a colleague of mine by the name of John Feminila about structured platforms and opinionated platforms and how they all relate together. So, I decided I would give her this title. But a little bit more about me. So I've worked at Pivotal since it wasn't Pivotal. I have this anecdote about I quit my last job to take a job at VMware in the Spring Source division, and as I was walking from my desk to quit to my boss's office, they announced Pivotal. So I was either the first hire or the last one to be hired by VMware. We were a Hadoop company for the first year, and I was this Spring application developer going, what have I gotten myself into? And then we got into the platform business. So I'm going to talk generally about platforms and what I think are two key things that they should do in terms of structure and opinions. And I'm going to use Cloud Foundry as an illustration. Sorry, I'm a big Cloud Foundry fanboy now. I should maybe get a URL. But so this is what the title has sort of evolved to over time. And I'm anybody who has ever written any of my Java code, I'm really sorry my class names are really long, but they're really descriptive. So, we're going to talk about self-service platform app deployment via structured automation with opinion overrides and maybe some callbacks in the middle of all this. Why is that? So I'm a big Spring Framework guy. Spring Framework has a bunch of default opinions built into it that you can always override via callback. So I'll give you some context why I use these things or how I'm going to use these things. So I'm going to use structure as a framework, and it's, we'd like to produce some outcomes. We're all in software. We'd like to produce something, even if it's intangible. And opinions are, specific implementations about reaching some desired outcome. Hopefully you'll leverage them together. A platform, I steal this one, the first bullet point directly from Bridget. It's a means to repeatedly deploy software. And then this one is something that I've come to view over time, that every platform is built with some degree of deployment process automation and some degree of software choice or software constraints. Anybody who's ever deployed WebSphere, an app in WebSphere, and you've used the admin console, there's still some automation that thing's triggering. Because something has to unpack that jar file and compile JSPs. Which anybody ever get the JSPs to pre-compile in the deployment process? I never did, but I was using struts. So this was the theme that Bridget gave me kind of to work from. She's like, well, maybe something about if your current platform doesn't do this, what's going to happen is your devs like automation. Your devs are really lazy. Automation is really awesome. It's like it repeats things, but you like the thing they're going to build is like maybe not going to be what you want. Like this is a robot, by the way. It happens to have feet that are made of 9-volt batteries attached to a tin can with some straws. Like I liken this, so any of you have children and get school photography from LifeTouch? We had the mother of all Ant scripts that built our software deployments, and then we'd hand them over to the ops person and say, unzip this, it'll work. Or not. So, like ad hoc automation is really, really awesome until someone who wasn't involved, like after the contractor who wrote the Ant script left, like nobody knew how to change it. It was like, well, we're just gonna stop using this now, and like we're gonna go back to like YOLO, you know. And I liken this to DevOps 0.1 because like we thought DevOps was like, I'm a developer, I got root access, let's go. Oh, what do you mean people can't order pictures? Oh, that's a bad thing. And typically, you know, all you operators in the room, I'm really sorry. I've written really horrible code, and yeah. You're the people who feel the pain of that. I eventually get paged, but not exactly. So the overall goal is to make the right thing to do the easy thing to do. So I'm going to talk about 2 of the things I think a platform should provide. There's a slew of them. Bridget gave me a time limit of 5 minutes. I'm bad at time limits, so that's why I'm only going to talk about 2. So they're both encompassed in this slide. That should be powered by a self-service API to trigger the software deployment lifecycle, and maybe there's some other features you want to have it do along the way, but this is the context I'm going to talk from. So, by the way, we still like constraints. Like anybody in the room in the security business? Why isn't everyone raising their hand? you all like paychecks, right? And like we're going to change it over time. So my talk is all themed around slides. So constraints are guardrails. There are also assurances that, like, if you stay within my guardrails, I'll do guaranteed things for you. I have promises. You live by my constraints, I'll do things for you. But over time, maybe we're going to want new things. So that becomes the important of, like, why we're finally the structure and opinions in my talk. So I took a class on slide development at one point in time, or presentation. Violates all the rules. But this is what I think a platform, at least from these perspectives, should really do. So, like if I'm building one of these, I want it to provide a framework that defines what my deployment lifecycle is, and I want to build that with a structure of API callbacks. Why is that? So, like the next time I need to change something, maybe that lifecycle doesn't need to entirely change, and maybe I'm not just like, yeah, I just wrote a script that does something. Well, when does that script get called, and what happens at various life cycles when it should or should not get called? And then, like, the first thing you do, like, figure out what you already do and, like, build something using it. Because that's going to tell you whether the API is right or whether the lifecycle is right. Because if you can't do with this what you already do, you're not going to be able to do anything in the future. And then, like, provide a really basic means for your devs to, like, lifecycle and sandbox new things. Like, we all want to, like, we want to foster innovation. But Donnie was involved with another colleague of mine, Josh McKenty, on this V model thing that's about, like, over time we drive towards standards. Like, does anybody not use a 17-inch rack? Like, that's Josh's thing. It's like, I worked at a company where we ordered the wrong size. So, what do you mean the racks don't fit the floor tile? Oh. Because we're not going to make it to production on time. Cloud Foundry. So let's talk about the examples I'm thinking of from Cloud Foundry. So the self-service API is this thing we call a cloud controller. It's a a fine-grained API that does lots and lots of things. Like, and you're free to call it. Well, if you're really good at like managing your OAuth tokens as a developer, good on you. You can curl all the things. We ship a Go CLI for the major platforms or the major OSs. That's a little bit more coarse-grained. And the thing that this really evidences is it calls this REST API. It's actually it's another one of the structures. It's got a plugin architecture. So like if you like don't want to remember all the endpoints you need to connect to, a colleague of ours who works in platform engineering named Guido Westenberg actually wrote a plugin that we call targets. So I actually can have a memory of like what my targets are, and it segregates all my OAuth tokens in separate places. So like all I really need to remember is like my password, which that's not always awesome. But yeah, I'm not really good at that. But that's what, like I use another system for that. I just have to remember the password to the LastPass system, and then everything's fine. Which my password, like if it's a default system password, there's almost always a password somewhere that's named password, and I've done things to it because I worked at IBM. The password's always password, right? But CF push is really the thing that, like, it's going to trigger this application lifecycle deployment process. And what actually happens is there's a bunch of cool stuff that happens behind the scenes. And what actually happens in the Cloud Controller API is I'm going to create an app because I have to create some definition and some metadata about what it is I'm doing. And then I'm going to upload some bits. And then they actually can be relatively arbitrary in terms of what they are, provided that you can do things with the next structure we have, which is called the build pack. And so this is actually the callback that you use to, like, let's get that thing containerized and scheduled on the platform. And it's really kind of a way as it's going to define the software that's going to be used to run the apps. So it's 3 methods. It's never this simple. Like, it can be. You're going to write it either in Ruby or shell scripts. I've written some, and like depending upon how long Bridget lets me ramble, I can walk you through some of it, or we can do it as an offline thing. Or I should also mention I organize a Cloud Foundry meetup that is really fine-grained. So like we've stopped meeting because I've decided to do more coarse-grained things. But it's got these 3 methods. Detect is going to, and by the way, this like I was like, what am I going to do for this? I'm like, oh, so I got a bomb sniffing dog. Because most of the time the software that I gave to the operations team was this bomb that was waiting to explode. The Claritin's like really good for like hallucinating dreams. But what it really does, and there's a much more long-winded description somewhere else on the Cloud Foundry, but it determines the attributes of what it's been given and says, you know, hey, can I deal with what you just uploaded as bits? So in the jar world, or in the Java world, our Java build pack we shipped actually can handle like 9 different like kinds of Java, including like Scala and Groovy and a bunch of other stuff. So it does a lot of checking, and so this is why we advocate for microservices, and then we have this Java build pack that's this gigantic monolith. So, but like, what can I do with it? And then we get to the really important phase, which is compile. So, like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to collect all the things, and I'm going to assemble them in a way that's meaningful to the containerization system, meaning like I need a directory structure, and like if I'm running a Java like Tomcat app, maybe that thing should maybe the thing I want it to run should live in the web apps directory, and so maybe I should do some like movement of that stuff. As well as like, oh, by the way, if I'm running Tomcat, maybe I'd like a version of Java. And so the cool part about all this is the ops team can really like start to implement this and say, like, we want to run this version of Java. So every time you give me a Java app, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get said version of Oracle's like license paying of the JDK or OpenJDK, like, yay. And I'm going to use that to run my Java apps. Or if I want to use this version of Tomcat, all of this is actually registered in terms of when the build happens and what, like, if you do actual version in your naming of stuff, you can tell when things have been uploaded. So you can actually like ask the platform through the API, like all the apps that are out there, what build packs are they using? Because like maybe you want to spot the ones that have a bunch of CVEs in them, and it's time to run the restaging process, because restaging just applies the next version of the build pack that if there's one available, or maybe you'd like to repush your app. And then the last thing is release. Which is I'm going to release this thing into the wild of the scheduler. I'm going to tell the scheduler how to start it. So the open source project pre-supplies some opinions. There's some other opinions that we have built as pivotal that like don't like Linux, want some Windows. We can add some Windows to that world. So this is my one pivotal commercial. We'd like you to use some of that. So, and this is the final version of the like where I got to. Like Cloud Foundry is opinions when you want them, structure when you don't. So, yeah. Normally I have a David S. Pumpkins slide because maybe someone has a question, because every time you see David S. Pumpkins, you have questions.
Well, by all means, go to your question slide if you have questions.
I didn't bring it in this time.
Nice. Okay, so let's see if people have questions about your whirlwind tour here of structure and opinions. So many opinions.
So structure and opinions are like sort of like the opposite thing, right? Like they're kind of like, yeah, valid, right? I guess that's true. So like opinions, I guess part of it is like deciding if you're allowing other opinions to be valid or not. Is there some sort of like line around like how you decide where structure is important versus like where opinions are important, or maybe I'm conflating this into something it's not?
No, I mean, and so that's a really good question. I did a horrible job of explaining it. I think that you are intimately related anytime you're talking about automation or any sort of a software architecture or framework, where you need a structure that like defines what can be done. And then, like, I'm using opinion in this case. Like, there's larger opinions that overarch all of this, but there are minute independent opinions in this that say, when I push a Java app, I want to use this version of Java. I want to use, if I'm running it on Tomcat, this version of Tomcat. And so I believe that the best way to allow people to express opinions is to give them a platform or a structure to do it on. So there's a bunch of, like, who did Lisp here? Like, who likes recursion? Like, I have a lot of recursive storytelling. So normally,
Can we take the ka-da-da-da-da of that?
normally we look at those things as being like polar opposites or being like diametrically opposed. Like, when we stop looking at things as being diametrically opposed, they actually have use cases in both worlds.
Awesome, that's super cool. All right. I do kind of feel like if I let Donnie ask another question, he might troll you, but I kind of want to hear it. So,
I was waiting to see if anybody else asked one because I hate to monopolize it. Could you talk a little bit to Bosch as to how it fits into that view of when you want structure, you get it, and when you want your own opinion, you can get that?
Also explain what Bosch is.
All right, so I have a 55-minute talk on this. So what Bosch is where we took Borg when we originally had those Google engineers working with us. And so it is an orchestration engine and scheduler for virtual machines. So it leverages a structure called the Cloud Provider Interface to provide infrastructure as a service providers with a means to implement a series of, I'm going to go 17 methods that define how their infrastructure can be consumed to stand up VMs and install software on it. And so that is how we actually deploy the stuff. Like, Cloud Foundry installs as a series of virtual machines. We just define a gigantic YAML file that defines like what are all the things that are there. So there's packages, releases, and there's deployments. And you tell Bosch about them, and Bosch does things with them, and then you have a running platform. The latest thing we announced, I'm sure Danny wants to hear about, is we entered into a partnership with Google, and somehow VMware like got into this mix as well, called PKS, which is a Pivotal Container Service, which is an automated way of standing up an isolated Kubernetes cluster for you to run some containerized workloads on.
And that was announced, what, yesterday, today?
Yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, at VMworld, so that was exciting. So
did I answer your question, Donnie? Like, or would you like me to do the 55-minute presentation?
Nice. Okay, and I feel like I could troll you and ask you even more questions, but I'll just end with, what one thing would you want people who are trying to think about their platform, which sounds immense and enormous, what one thing should they be thinking about as they're making those decisions?
I'm going to troll the security guy. Security. Like, decide what you want your security architecture to be. Developers are really, really, really bad at security. Guilty as charged. So find a way, and like in Java world, we have this thing that's called AOP, which is like, a proxy in front of everything. Proxies like add latency, but they're a great way to introduce security. And like, find a way to wrap whatever dumb shit I'm going to do as a developer and make it secure.
Nice, and I think that's the best place to leave it. You got structure, you got opinions. Let's keep the business safe.
Yeah.
Right? Give it up for Andrew.